Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. There was a time when US allies in Europe and the Middle East were worried by Washington's Asia pivot. Announced in 2011, the policy was supposed to prioritize Asia, which has half the world's population, and is on course to account for half of the planet's economic output. But the Arab Spring, the Israeli-Palestinian deadlock, and the Ukraine crisis seem to have taken priority instead. And this January, in his State of the Union speech, the US president only fleetingly alluded to the Asia pivot, also known as rebalancing. Now, 3 years after the Signature Foreign Policy Initiative was announced, Obama makes his first state visit to Japan. He's also visiting South Korea, Malaysia, and the Philippines. To talk about this trip, I'm joined by Yuki Tatsumi, Senior Associate of the East Asia Program at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. Yuki Tatsumi, thank you very much for being with me on this program. I'd like to
Thank you for having me.
Start by asking you, if this Asia pivot really was a pivot, wouldn't Obama have made this trip 3 years ago? Is it all show and no substance?
I think the first thing that I would say is that pivot was perhaps the misnomer of the term, because pivot inherently implies that you're pivoting to somewhere, meaning you're some areas behind you. And that was really not the intent of the Obama administration. It was clear all along that Middle East continues to occupy a fair amount of their strategic attention, and yet they have to cope with the reality that Asia-Pacific region does have a dynamic economy. It has the half of the world's population, and it is bound to command U.S. attention also. So I think the more of a rebalance was more of an appropriate term, especially as U.S. was pulling out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Having said that, though, there were, I believe, a little bit of a confusion both within Asia-Pacific region and outside. Because when the word pivot first came out, they really were promoted as a package of a really boosted up a political military commitment to the region. However, as the second term of the Obama administration began, that narrative started to shift to more of a greater focus on the trade and economy. So I think the whole region is kind of not sure that what specifically this rebalance package might include.
What have you seen in terms of any concrete evidence of a rebalancing then? I mean, if we leave the word pivot to one side, but in the last 3 years, what actual concrete moves have there been?
I think that what do you have to show for it is the challenge that the Obama administration is facing. First, they did talk about the boosted up naval presence and more of a military presence in the Western Pacific region, but then that is really not an increase in absolute term, but rather in a relative term, as they're pulling out of Middle East after Iraq and Afghanistan, they are reallocating some of the resources back to Asia Pacific. So it's not an absolute plus. It's more of on a relative terms, military presence elsewhere might decrease, but then perhaps Asia Pacific stays present. But then, as at the end result, what you will get is the seemingly appearance of an increase in Asia Pacific. I just don't think that the region didn't find that very convincing.
Well, it perhaps especially hasn't found it convincing after the U.S. response on Ukraine, and I would imagine that China is feeling quite heartened by the U.S. response to Ukraine.
I think the anxiety from the U.S. response so far to Crimea situation is definitely the most recent example of that gave the greater anxiety in Asia. But then I think it kind of started from last year. As if you recall, there was an allegation toward the Syrian government about the chemical use weapon against its people, and how the U.S. position buckled and kind of, they went back and forth between military option, no military option, whatnot. So I think combining those two incidents, I think Asia-Pacific region facing increasing assertiveness by China on the maritime domain literally by the day, really feels uncertain about what the reliability of the United States as a provider of the stability.
How far would the US go? I mean, what's the bottom line here? In how would it get involved, do you think, if Japanese sovereignty was more, or claims of sovereignty were more directly challenged?
That's a very interesting question, and that is the question I think Japanese government hopes to hear a clear answer from Mr. Obama during his state visit in Japan. He had already indicated, as I hear, that defense of Senkaku Island is included or is covered under the Article 5 of the Security Treaty between the two countries. That said, how U.S. military would actually get involved and what types of action that U.S. government would take, it's still very clear, not clear. Obviously, some of those planning will remain unclear to outsiders. However, there just was not a clearer articulation up to now about how U.S. might respond. So I think definitely that's one thing that Japanese government hopes to hear from Mr. Obama while he's in Japan.
One development which could get the U.S. off the hook, so to speak, militarily, would be if the Japanese armed forces were built up into a much more powerful force on land, sea and air. Do you think Japanese society is ready for that now?
I think more ready than they were, let's say, 5 years ago. But I think there is a still considerable resistance toward self-defense forces having a more prominent role in terms of attack capabilities and so forth. But as I just said, Japanese people are more ready to see more robust defense capability than they were, much more so than they were 5 years ago.
So you think the complexes about the imperial past have largely been shaken off?
I think there's still reminiscences there. There are some political leaders in Japan that do not let others forget about that. So I think as long as that tend to linger, it's very difficult for Japanese defense establishment to make a clear departure from the and completely shake off those legacy of the unfortunate imperial legacy.
One stark reminder of this happened when nearly 150 lawmakers visited the Yasukuni Shrine, and this was just ahead of President Obama's visit. What do you make of the timing of that visit then?
I think the strictly according to the shrine's calendar, it is at the time of the Spring Festival, so that is no more than that, no less than that. That said, I do like to mention that Mr. Abe did not go, and none of his major cabinet members also did not make a visit. So there is a clear recognition there amongst the highest level of the government that that is really not the appropriate action to take, especially in the eve of Mr. Obama arriving in Japan.
And yet, this controversy comes back every year, doesn't it?
It unfortunately does. Spring Festival occurs every year. Fall Festival occurs every year. So unfortunately, it does keep coming back.
I'm just interested. Do you think that Japan could at least say more to smooth things out with its neighbors about the wartime past, or is anything a Japanese government says never going to be enough for the Chinese, the Koreans, and other nations?
I think China and Korea are two very different cases. China, it was a case of, pre-1945, there was a case of wartime aggression in there. And Korea is a little bit more complicated because there were longer history before 1945 of Japan colonizing Korea. And that said, you just mentioned about any statement will be ever enough. I think that is the exact issue that Japanese government are exploring with, particularly with the South Korean government at this moment.
Yuki Tatsumi, I'd like to move on to one or two big geostrategic questions because, of course, Obama is not only in Japan, but as I said, he's also going to South Korea and Malaysia and the Philippines, all of them US allies, all part of this US rebalancing, or as it used to be called, the pivot. Do you think those other countries are in any mood to stand up to Chinese expansion in that region?
I think obviously Japan feels that challenge, and it does feel the urgency to stand up, and that is reflected on the Japanese government's national security strategy and its defense policy revisions. And also, I do think that if anybody in Southeast Asia, it is really the Philippines that is really feeling that pressure. So I think there is a meaning of I think there is a message that the U.S. is trying to send by picking these particular 4 countries for his Asia trip this time.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your analysis and insights. Yuki Tatsumi, Senior Associate of the East Asia Program at the Stimson Center, joining me from Washington, D.C. And you can check up on upcoming interviews, if you like, by looking at my Twitter handle, which is @ArmandGeorgian. Do stay tuned to France 24.